mynews.studio.
10 indigenous territories recognized in Brazil and California's ocean now co-managed by tribal nations. Are we seeing a global shift in conservation, or is this just the beginning?
Today is 2025, 11/24. There's a lot to unpack. Brazil just recognized 10 new indigenous territories, and it happened right on Indigenous Peoples Day at COP30. That move came after sustained pressure from indigenous leaders, especially the Munduruku people. These lands stretch across São Paulo, Amazonas, Pará, and Mato Grosso do Sul.
Exactly. And this isn't just a gesture for the headlines. These territories belong to groups like the Mura, Tupinamba, Pataxó, Guarani Kaiowá, and others. With these additions, Brazil now has 21 demarcated indigenous lands, totaling 117.4 million hectares. That's about 13.8% of Brazil's land area. And a lot of that is still intact tropical forest, some of the largest patches left globally.
The research really stands out. Expanding these territories could prevent up to 20% more deforestation, and Brazil could cut its carbon emissions by 26% by 2030. So here, land rights are directly shaping environmental policy.
Right, and then you have Minister Sônia Guajajara promising to allocate another 59 million hectares for indigenous management. That's a strong signal. Indigenous rights are being built into climate policy. But there's still a long road. 107 lands are ready, but waiting for legal finalization, and 161 more are somewhere earlier in the demarcation process.
Switching over to the U.S., California just established the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. It covers 4,500 square miles, so not a small area. What's really different here is the co-stewardship model. For the first time, indigenous communities have an actual seat at the decision-making table for a U.S. marine sanctuary.
And this process took years. It started in 2015, when Fred Collins asked his daughter, Violet Sage Walker, to carry on the work. After he passed, she brought together a huge coalition: tribal elders, students, the whole community. Now, the sanctuary protects marine life, kelp forests, beaches, and more than 200 shipwrecks. And importantly, it blocks oil drilling and mining.
The management structure is a real shift. There's an intergovernmental policy council with both tribal and state representatives, a sanctuary advisory council that handles management, an indigenous cultures panel for cultural and language issues, and joint projects with universities for research. It's a move away from top-down management to shared control.
NOAA officials even say this is untested territory. They expect the model will evolve. But it's already a major shift, indigenous knowledge and Western science working side by side. Do you think this could influence conservation outside the U.S.?
At COP30, you could see the global interest. More than 3,000 indigenous delegates were there, and the renewed $1.8 billion forest and land tenure pledge is supposed to send funding directly to indigenous organizations, skipping the usual bureaucracy. There's a plan to recognize 160 million hectares of indigenous land by 2030, 63 million of those in Brazil.
But indigenous leaders keep pointing out, recognition isn't enough if resources don't follow. The coordination of indigenous organizations of the Brazilian Amazon, for instance, says climate finance needs to go straight to indigenous territorial funds, not through government channels. Brazil's new Vituque Fund is a first step, but leaders want full institutional support to match the promises.
There's another issue. Even with all these advances, indigenous peoples still weren't official negotiators at COP30. They're asking for more than recognition. They want legal enforcement of rights, real participation in climate decisions, and for their priorities to be built into national and global plans.
California's model might offer a path: legal guarantees for indigenous participation, dedicated money for indigenous-led management, and weaving traditional ecological knowledge into conservation. Can this approach scale up elsewhere, or do you think local politics will block it?
It's really an experiment. Getting indigenous communities equal authority and using their knowledge tends to improve biodiversity and cultural preservation. But the key is actual power sharing, not just appearances.
So, why does all this matter? It's about justice, survival, and results you can measure. Indigenous stewardship isn't just symbolic anymore. These steps are overdue recognition, but they're also practical strategies for protecting places where other models have failed.
And as Violet Sage Walker said, the real goal is for people to see that Indigenous peoples are, and always have been, the stewards of these lands. Now, it's about turning that recognition into actual resources and authority.
Indigenous stewardship is moving from the sidelines to the center, both in negotiations and on the ground. People everywhere are watching to see what happens next.
Thanks for being with us as we discussed Brazil's new indigenous lands, California's co-managed sanctuary, and the bigger picture for rights and climate.
Thank you for listening. This episode was powered by mynews.studio. Try it now for free.